Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. We have a good one for you, as always. And we have some pretty important stories to talk about right off the bat. Finally, it is getting some big mainstream play, some big mainstream coverage, and finally, it's getting some coverage on our show for the first time. President Biden and Hunter Biden had a pretty rough couple of weeks in court, in tax evasions, plea deals that fell through. We'll take a look at why all of that stuff is, and a little bit of a pledge for me to focus a little bit more on this in the future, and also, of course, put it in its political context, as we so love to do. Also, a full ranking and review of the Teamsters UPS contract, what it did do and what it didn't. Also, Joe Manchin is apparently thinking about leaving the Democrats. Is it a big loss after all? Honestly, I certainly don't think so. And what good is he if he, isn't going to be a senator by the end of the next election by all accounts? All right, with that being said, we do have a great show for you today, and we thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really do have some good stuff to close out the week and some pretty important stuff because, again, this is, I think, with the Hunter Biden situation, it's a very, very interesting situation. And largely because I pull from, broadly left-wing and mainstream media news sources, I just have not, talked probably as much as I should about what was going on with the Hunter Biden story. And, I have been following it, though. It just has not made it up on, the 3 or 4 stories that we do 3 times a week here on the show, and we can do it 3 times a week. But it is a very, very important story. It pretty much goes like, Hunter Biden is doing, even if it's not, the most worst thing that by any stretch, his other son, Beau Biden, look up what he did for DuPont. In my opinion, that is worse. That is, influence selling. Everyone does it. It is a very popular kind of common thing. He also had, I think, a gun charge and a tax charge that he went through a plea deal on, but it fell through. So that's what has been going on. So it's slightly above the average for normal influence selling of politicians, and it's something that I think is going to be a little politically effective. But first, I do want to get into some of the details. This is written by Peter Baker here. They thought it was over. They thought they could put it in the rearview mirror. All that Hunter Biden had to do was show up in a courtroom, answer a few questions, sign some paperwork, and that would be it. Not the Republicans will let it go, but any real danger would be in the past. The criminal investigation that Biden's advisors believed was all but done has been given new life with the collapse of the plea agreement and the appointment of a special counsel who might bring the president's son to trial. What has been a painful but relatively contained political scandal that animated mainly partisans on the right could now extend for months, just as the president is gearing up for his re-election campaign. And really, this is how as we look for the president to gear up his re-election campaign, he is going to 100% attack Trump on all the fact that he has 3 to 4 indictments coming down the pike. And it may not be logically true, it may not be reasonably true, but just in the same way he did after the pussy grabbing tape, I hate to say it, in the wake of the second debate, he brought in Bill Clinton's accusers to the debate and really did, I think that did a lot more than people realized to neutralize that attack. And that, I think, is what Trump can do, turn right away, point to Biden, say, you are just like all the rest of them. You're trying to say that I am corrupt, I'm a crook. Well, look at what you did. You're just no better than the rest of them. You're just a complete politician. And, all politicians do is lie. And if he's able to pay Joe Biden as that, I think that could be a pretty effective attack line. But it's attack lines are one thing, and then of course there is always the big difference between the political and the legal. We talked about this with Trump a lot, but it seems like we're gonna have to talk about it a little bit more with Joe Biden as well. This time it's been questioned about Hunter Biden's conduct that may be harder for the White House to dismiss as politically motivated because they're coming from courts of law that they just yelled at Trump for calling politically appointed. So again, Attorney General Merrick Garland, he elevated the federal prosecutor investigating President Biden's son Hunter to the status of special counsel after negotiations to revive a plea agreement on tax and gun charges floundered. The move raised possibility that Biden could be tried, Hunter Biden could be tried in the politically charged case, which seemed resolved into a few weeks ago. The investigation appeared to be near an end in recent months when Biden agreed to plead guilty to 2 tax misdemeanors, a deal that would allow him to avoid prosecution on a gun charge. So he's going to have some probation or some very light thing for taxes. And honestly, I do not know how that compares to kind of the broad scheme of things, what people would normally get for crimes like this. Mostly rich people doing them, probably not going to get that much more than a slap on the wrist. Weiss has been roundly criticized by Republicans over the terms of the deal. He asked Garland on Tuesday to be named special counsel. So prosecutors for Weiss's office also filed court papers on Friday indicating they had reached an impasse with Biden's lawyers over the proposed plea deal, suggesting he might now be indicted. So essentially there's something about don't really know what it is. That really caused a stick up in the plea deal, but it is also a very, very big thing that Weiss in this, because he has been kind of politicized by the Republicans. It has been pretty major that he's been made special counsel as well. Garland also scoffed the idea that Weiss would ever be a special counsel, saying Weiss actually possessed more power as a sitting U.S. attorney than he would as special counsel. But at a news conference on Friday, Garland said that Weiss had concluded the investigation, reached a stage. The investigation had reached a stage, in which the powers of a special counsel were needed. He did not explain what Mr. Weiss meant. The appointment of Weiss reinforces for the American people that the department's commitment to both independence and accountability in particularly sensitive matters. I'm confident that Weiss will carry out his responsibility in an even-handed and urgent manner in accordance with the highest traditions of this department. While department officials vehemently denied the announcement was motivated by political pressures, the appointment clearly provides the Democrats with a counter-argument against Republican claims that Garland has weaponized the special counsel regulations to target Trump while sparing Biden the same levels of prosecution. And also gives Republicans a little bit of more of a case to say, well, your guy's under special counsel investigation. Well, so is your guy's son. And your guy probably helped him out with it. 10% to the big guy. I was talking about this kind of thing like last night, and it was like, people may not know now. The liberals out there, you may not know 10% of the big guy. Who's the big guy? Well, the big guy is Joe Biden, and 10% to the big guy was what they were apparently, Hunter in the leaked messages said that they were going to give to him after this deal was done. He apparently, would put his father on the phone to be like, I can get in contact with the vice president right now. We could get something done. All that kind of special wheeling and dealing. And then, of course, the tax deal. I think we do probably still will have to wait a little bit more for details about how exactly this thing fell through. But it is very, very remarkable that this has gone in the way that it is. So Weiss's announcement abandoning the plea agreement he originally reached with Biden on tax and gun charges means that he could take the case to trial in states other than Delaware, where he is U.S. attorney and has jurisdiction. Some analysts speculated that requesting special counsel status may be about empowering him to prosecute out of state. Friday's announcement feels like more of a technicality, allowing Weiss to bring charges outside of Delaware now that the talks have been broken down. Even so, a trial by jury of Hunter Biden's peers would be a spectacle that could prove distracting and embarrassing for the White House while providing more fodder to the president's Republican critics, I guess. The president's advisors were frustrated as a result and resigned to months of additional torment, even if they were not alarmed by the prospect of a wider investigations. After 5 years of probing Hunter's dealings, it seemed unlikely Weiss will discover much that is new. So David Axelrod, who is essentially, could be viewed as a complete, total Democratic partisan here in this situation. But bottom line is, politically, it seems like this could be a really good tool for Trump to neutralize some of these attacks with just the voters that he needs to have them kind of politically neutralized when things get kind of tough. But legally, I think, definitely it remains to be seen because the plea deal falling through. We don't really know too much about why that is. It was going to be, relatively easy for Hunter Biden. Just had to, plead guilty on the 2 tax charges to avoid pleading guilty on the gun charges. I think just a misdemeanor or something like that was the final verdict there. But now it seems like that has fallen through. So it's definitely going to be interesting to watch where it goes from here. We're going to talk a lot about the Teamsters strike next. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening and supporting Newsflash. We now have a brand new way for you to be heard if you want. whether a text message or a audio message. Please, no video messages. I really just do not think that's necessary. We have a new feedback box open for you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is officially open. SWRN702@gmail.com. Send a text message, send a voice message of no more than 30 seconds via the voice memos function. Either of those two options, and we will 100%, not going to find this guarantee anywhere else. We're going to play it on the show, listen to what you have to say, and it literally could be about anything. Well, if it's inappropriate, we won't play it, but it could be about anything. Thank you so much. This is my thank you to all the listeners who have stuck out with us and want to have their own voice in the show. SWRN702@gmail.com is the address. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's go now to our next story. Big news coming out of one of the biggest unions in the country right now is the Teamsters. And it's a little bit of a narrative here from Barry Eldon and Jackman. So let's get into it. At noon on July 25th, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters released a press release announcing the union had reached a tentative agreement with the package giant United Parcel Service, UPS. The contract covering 340,000 workers in every zip code in the U.S. is the largest private sector contract in North America. Every zip code in the U.S. It handles 25 million parcels a day, equivalent to 1/4 of all U.S. parcel volume and 6% of GDP per day. The deal came 6 days before the contract was set to expire on the 31st of July, which was surprising given the brinksmanship that had characterized negotiations up to that point. Since kicking off the contract campaign in August of 2022, Teamsters General President Sean O'Brien, who had won election to the union's top leadership position in 2021 as part of a union reform coalition that had promised to take more of a fighting stance against UPS, stated that if a deal was not ratified by the 31st of July 2023, Teamsters would go on strike the next day on August 1st. But on June 30th, the IBT announced that UPS pledged to come to a deal by July 5th, which would have given the UPS Teamsters members time to ratify the contract by August 1st. But at 4 a.m. on July 5th, the IBT announced that the talks had broken down, with the company claiming that it had nothing more to give after delivering a contract not much improved from an early one riddled with takeaways. The early morning breakdown was not expected. With no further talks scheduled, O'Brien directed negotiating committee members to return home and prepare for a strike. The next 2 weeks saw a major escalation in the contract campaign that had been building for almost a year. The UPS Teamsters organizing practice picket lines at UPS facilities across the country, reaching small towns like Presque Isle, Maine, and Minot, North Dakota. It sent a message to UPS management that Teamsters were ready to strike if we have to, as T-shirts and hoodies popular at the practice picket lines read. The strike threat convinced UPS management that it did have actually some more to give after all. On the 19th of July, UPS and IBT jointly announced that talks would resume on the 25th. The press release announcing the tentative agreement would come just hours after talks resumed. After a two-person committee made up of representatives of all 176 IBT locals with UPS members nearly unanimously endorsed the agreement on the 31st of July. Members started voting on whether to ratify the agreement using an online voting system on the 3rd of August. Balloting closes on August 22nd. The IBT touted this tentative contract as historic, with O'Brien saying this contract sets a new standard in the labor movement and raises the bar for all workers. These are not empty claims. The tentative agreement contains significant improvements for UPS workers, thanks in large part to the pressure that Teamsters created over a years-long contract campaign. And that is a kind of a very interesting and important part of these relationships. When you have a contract that is that big and that relevant, and you see this with the UAW as well. This is going to be an industry-defining, standard-setting contract that, just based on the capitalist free market, these other companies are going to have to live up to. They're going to have to find a way to, compete. Otherwise, the union setting a standard, is the way, or at least it used to go, is really, truly a rising tide lifting all boats. So it's a very, very important and interesting thing there to see how that was kind of defined as a standard-setting agreement, which shows the power of unions and how it's so important just to increase that density. The more powerful there are in terms of negotiating wise, the more powerful concessions will, the easier concessions will come, and more rights will come for more people. So The proposed agreement eliminates the two-tier driver classification that sparked widespread member anger in the 2018 contract. It provides sizable wage increases, especially for the lowest-paid part-timers, which was one of the biggest parts of the contract. There's some people who are like, "Yo, yeah, we're good. We're making 170, on the very highest end per year in terms of like the freight driving." But our part-timers, which are a bigger part of the workplace, they are getting absolutely screwed. So we have to stand with them. This was really a strike for, biggest part, the part-timers was a big part of that. It also requires the UPS to create more full-time jobs, getting some of them out of that rather undesirable situation, provides protections against excessive heat, restricting management surveillance, and limiting forced overtime, among other gains. The UPS Teamsters recognize these important wins. Still, some are left feeling that they could have won more. Ironically, this reticence stems from what won the union such a strong contract: heightened expectations due to member organizing as part of a year-long contract campaign, which is very, very interesting. It is very kind of when you get yourself so worked up, when you get yourself, there were some parts of the left that were, I think, on this a little bit as well. Some more kind of fringe left groups were very much kind of in the line of, we need to, because we were so worked up, we were so ready, we're ready to strike UPS, we're going to fuck you up. Is that kind of mindset where, we will shut down the economy to get what we need out of UPS. And the fact that became such a big mindset that where people were really going in thinking that this was going to be a strike, when they got something, and they really were militarized and organized, that when they're, a relatively good, a huge improved contract came along, they were almost a little like, is this too good to be true? But I think there, there's a certain, that edge, that kind of awareness of the situation, the kind of push to do more. I think that's something that should really be encouraged if we were to have, more militant, more aggressive labor movements. But I think you can also do that while saying, a win is a win, and we need to take this and build on it. That's the most important thing. A win is a win. You can say that, just vote for it, shut up, whatever. But, you say just come back even harder the next time and keep pushing, because we have a lot of ground to make up. We're not going to make, I do agree with the proposition. We're not, UPS, Teamsters are not going to make up all the ground that's been squandered away over years and years. Over the course of one contract negotiating session, but they could make it up over 2, 3, 4, 5. That is for sure. What was this the best UPS contract the Teamsters could have won? And will this contract lead to new energy on the part of rank and file UPS workers and workers throughout the logistics industry? To answer those questions, we first have to examine what was achieved in the tentative agreement. So the signature demand here from the Teamsters was abolishing this hated second-tier driver classification that, when honestly, I thought they were not really going to be able to do, because it was, already entrenched. They just got it secured in. UPS management was incredibly happy with that concession that the old Teamsters leadership gave back in 2018. So I thought it would be really kind of tough for them to pry that away, but they were able to do that, which is a pretty significant thing. And I think helps give people a very good sense of, when we stand up as one, we can actually do this. We can actually, turn around and do this in a very, we can stand up for things that we never really thought that we were going to be able to win. Because I think that, at least from my perspective, I'm obviously not a UPS worker by any stretch of the imagination. The signature Teamsters demand, again, was getting rid of that 22.4 drivers tier after the article in 2018. That contracted the contract that created the tier. These 22.4 drivers did the same work as the regular package car drivers, who were paid on average $6 an hour less and had no right to limit overtime work. Not only do tiers create lower paid categories of workers, but they have a corrosive effect on union solidarity, creating divisions between different tiers of workers. These tentative agreements immediately abolishes the 22.4 classification. All those drivers are going to be reclassified as RPCDs, just regular package car drivers, following ratification, and placed on the same wage progression as RPCDs. For these roughly 25,000 UPS Teamsters, that'll mean a $6 hourly pay bump once they complete their 4-year progression, on top of a general wage increase that were negotiated in the agreement. For a 22.4 driver with a base wage of $36 an hour, this amounts to an immediate wage increase of more than 24%, with 37.5% increase over the life of the agreement. Beyond the 22.4 issue, the union also won substantial wage increases for all job classifications. The wage increase schedule is confusing, but the IBT put out a helpful chart that includes several different scenarios for different types of UPS workers. It shows that an RPCD, so just a regular standard, guy who comes to your house who's reached the top rate, i.e. gone through the 4-year wage progression, sees a wage bump from $41.50 to $49 an hour, an 18% wage increase over 5 years. But in keeping with the closing gap between the full-time and part-time Teamsters, the highest wage increases are reserved for those at the bottom of the wage scale. The tentative agreement creates a wage floor of $21 per hour, $5.50 above the current wage floor of $15.50, which is a huge bump up. Taking that scenario, for a part-time worker who's been at UPS for 1 year, the pay goes from $16.65 per hour to $25.75 per hour, a 55% wage increase. So really some pretty big, really incredible wage increases across the board. Again, these are these biggest ever. No UPS contract ever has included raises this large for part-time UPS Teamsters, going back to when the part-time tier was created in 1982. That contract cut part-timers' wages from $12 to $8 an hour, breaking the wage parity that had previously existed between part and full-timers, which, I think really is illogical because they're doing the same work. They're just doing it for a little bit less time, but it's just as valuable. You're still going to have to pay them less money because they do less hours, but, again, it's just... you can't get yourself too worked up about it. The rate remained frozen until the 1997 contract, where after a momentous 15-day strike, the part-time UPS Teamsters got a wage increase of 50 cents over 5 years, from 18, which is that's very 1997 of them, from 8 to 8.50. The 1997 rate stayed in place until the 2013 contract, which raised it to 10 for most starting part-timers. 2018 contract finally raised it to $15.50 per hour, and then so look at the progression there. They've got 8 to 8.50 over 5 years, and now they're going for almost right away. They're bumping it up $5.50 hourly for the part timers at the lowest wage floor. There are two important caveats here to this wage package, though, before it gets too good. And first, the tentative agreement creates a new tier of part-timers who will be hired after the agreement is ratified. They'll start at the new $21 per hour wage floor, but will top out at $23 after 5 years, $23 hourly, as opposed to $25.75 for those who started prior to ratification. Second, many UPS part-timers work under market rate adjustments, which have already raised their wages well above $15.50 an hour. Regarding the first point, the tentative agreement does create a new tier. Those hired after the agreement is ratified will not catch up to those hired before by the end of the agreement. Someone hired immediately before the agreement is ratified will be making $2.75 per hour more than someone hired immediately afterward. And again, this is the part about, the kind of company logic and union, I guess, having to, do some concessions here, is that it just does not make any sense. It's just, not any kind of logical sense in the grand scheme of what's fair, especially with regards to how much money all of those people, especially some of those part-timers who are really the backbone of the whole UPS infrastructure, that's how they make their, record profits a year. But there's it's just they hired after this date, we're doing something different. It's just so they can skimp on pennies. They can push that profit margin up year after year after year. But yeah, it's a very, very weird tier. And it's because it will still start at a wage rate that's 34% higher than any of the part-timers starting prior to the agreement. So even though that they would not catch up with the existing part-timers over the course of the contract term, they would still be pulling up the bottom of the UPS wage distribution. It would be preferable if the new tier was not in the agreement, but even with the tier, the bottom line is the tentative agreement does far more to raise up the bottom than any previous UPS contract. The key thing to watch is what happens to the bottom of the UPS wage distribution over the next few contracts. Regarding the second point, it's true that the market rate adjustments mean that the UPS part-timers are already making above $15.50 per hour, but there are two things to keep in mind. First, roughly 60,000 UPS part-timers are currently making less than the new proposed $21 per hour wage floor. The part-timers will get significant pay bump increase above the GWI, which is the general wage increase, because they're also getting special part-time tier increases. But as that tier goes away, and they create a new tier of people that were hired after this contract is being signed. Why? Because you need a tier. A little drop-off point to pay people less if you are UPS, apparently. Second, even when the MRAs are in effect, this is a market rate adjustment, say if you live in Boise versus New York City, Second, even when MRAs are in effect that raise the part-time wage floor above $21 per hour, those $7.50 GWI increase as a general wage increase over 5 years would be on top of whatever MRA market rate wage rate that those part-timers currently get. Louisville Local 89, home of the General Secretary Treasurer Fred Zuckerman, pointedly voted against recommending the agreement at the two-person meeting held after the tentative agreement was announced. Members did so specifically because they wanted assurances the GWI raises would be on top of the MRA wage rates. Once they got those assurances, they switched to endorsing the deal, which is pretty interesting. It was one of the most important, I guess, I don't know, I wouldn't say important, but, politically relevant locals there kind of reacting to the moment and kind of switching up a little bit. The percentage wage increase for those under MRAs will not be as big as those for will not be as big as for those stuck at the contractual base of $15.50, but $7.50 over 5 years is still pretty significant, almost 36% up for someone currently earning at the $21 per hour, floor as a part of this kind of wage progression here. But beyond wages, there are some major improvements requiring the UPS to combine 15,000 jobs to combine 50,000 current part-time jobs into 7,500 full-time jobs. New safety and health protections against excessive heat, getting MLK Day as a paid holiday, limits on forced overtime for drivers, and limits on driver surveillance and using technology for discipline, as well as improved transfer rights for part-time workers. In sum, the tentative agreement announced for UPS would be far and away the best contract ever negotiated at UPS, even compared to the 1997 contract won after an historic strike. Well, keeping that first fact in mind, but also keep a second fact in mind. While many UPS Teamsters recognize the real gains in the proposed contract, they are left with the feeling that it leaves unfinished business. Most will likely vote to ratify the agreement, especially in the more militant locals that have been out front throughout the contract campaign, but with less enthusiasm than one might expect given significant gains. Why would a contract that, on its face, is such a massive improvement generate such a mixed response? Here we must take a key factor into account: workers' rising expectations. And that, I think, is a pretty good point to end this story on, because that is the thing that will determine the future. What workers are able to demand for themselves, what they believe is possible, and as that continues to go up, it cannot go up fast enough. I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see what concessions are gained, and hopefully that spirit spreads throughout the labor movement. And it's really kind of incredible when you have a Democratic union working hard in communication, doing what it should be doing. Pretty incredible things can happen. All right, with that being said, let's go to our final story. Joe Manchin seeming to make a big announcement. Here's how it sounded on CNN.
Well, tonight, Senator Joe Manchin says that he's one step closer to leaving the Democratic Party. Take a look at the evolution, shall we say, just over the past decade. We've got a spokesman that he says that he's not, in 2010, he's not switching parties. Remember that? In 2016, Manchin says that he hasn't spent a day considering a party switch. Then 2021 comes up. He says he's never even considered it. Later that year, he'd switch if he ever becomes an embarrassment to the party. Then you got last year. Bottom line, he's a West Virginia Democrat. Late last year, no intentions. Earlier this year, quote, I identify as an American. Last month, we'll see what happens. And today?
I'm thinking seriously, what's the best? For me, I have to have peace of mind, basically. The brand has become so bad, the D brand and R brand. In West Virginia, the D brand, because it's nationally brand. It's not the Democrats in West Virginia. It's the Democrats in Washington, or the Washington policies of the Democrats. You've heard me say a million times, I'm not a Washington Democrat.
Yeah, so again, it's like, I kind of get where he's coming from a little bit. There's some things I can definitely say are true. With a good part of the country, the Democratic brand is complete and utter, dog shit. But like, he's doing a very kind of smart politician thing of being, this is bad, but, kind of coming at it for very, selfish reasons. So saying what people want to hear, but for your own kind of motivation, because he's not someone who's serious when it comes to, like, he's a West Virginia Democrat. Like, what are the things that he is even, pro-working class on, he's just socially conservative and pro-business. He is, not in any way, he's not it's social liberal in the way that a lot of West Virginia people are not, social liberals, but he is not economically on the left either. He's not someone who's a real true working class fighter. He's the person who owns the coal mines that would probably, try and bring in the National Guard to shoot any striking coal miners. Like that is the type of guy that Joe Manchin is. He is somebody who is in control of that state. There's no major stands that he's taken to benefit people. He just comes off as somebody who's going to be sitting in, the kind of the big overlording office, looking down on people, working somehow. I just, picture, him showing up at one day in a collared shirt and a hard hat on the coal mines that he owns, just being like, everyone working hard here, making me money. All that, like that's the kind of vibe that I get from him. Not someone who's going to be, the West Virginia Democrat. Like, he's just plays a lot of people's like kind of socially liberal bona fides and says, "Oh, I'm working class, whatever," and gives off this kind of "I'm a West Virginia." Like people think that means something, very very different than what it actually means there. Even if the Democratic brand is pretty bad in West Virginia, I think the real reality is his brand, I think, is worse. It's like it's showing up that, or I wouldn't say. Actually, you know what? To be fair, I would not say his brand is worse than the Democratic brand in West Virginia, but I do think his brand is definitely declining because of those things that I mentioned. Like people are starting to realize that he just does not stand for anyone other than his rich friends. He is not going to be someone who's going to, sure, he'll take some stands on social issues, but he's not going to make any, big stand one way or the other. He doesn't do anything that is democratic, small d Democrat, or I guess big D Democratic in any sense of the word. So it's like people are starting to wonder, it's like, what is this guy doing? What is his whole point? And I think a lot of people are wanting that because Jim Justice, the Republican governor of West Virginia, is trying to run for Senate. He's absolutely kicking his ass in the polls. So, my big question at the end of the day is, if he is not a senator, if he is a lobbyist, which is assuming is going to be his next career, some kind of K Street position or something like that, just a job where you've done a lot of things prior and just get essentially no-show job that pays very, very well. I guess my question is, why does it matter what party he's in when he's going to lose in 2024 to someone who's eminently more likable, even as a Republican, Jim Justice? That should go, to say how much I hate Joe Manchin. And on that note, we'll be back on Monday. It's Newsflash.